Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Nun Vav opens with a Mishnah, which is actually the last few lines at the bottom of Daf Nun Hey. The Mishnah lists 6 activities that the people of Yericho, the Jews living in Yericho, used to do. 3 of them the Chachamim protested against, 3 of them they did not, but they apparently weren't happy with any of them. This list is brought here because the first thing on the list relates to doing malacha, doing work on Erev Pesach. The Gemara will analyze the 6 things on the list, explain what they are in detail, bring a couple of other lists of things that people used to do that the Chachamim were pleased or displeased with, and explain the various items on each of these lists. So first of all, let's see the Mishnah. The Mishnah lists 6 things. 3 things the Chachamim did not stop them, and 3 things they did stop them. The 3 things that they did not stop them are as follows. They would graft trees, branches from trees, onto one another on Erev Pesach as a type of malacha. They would wrap up Shema, which means that they put the words together in a way that they shouldn't have, and they also harvested grain before the Karban Emer is brought. Now the halacha is you were not allowed to eat grain before the Karban Emer is brought. The people of Yericho would harvest it and heap it up in a pile and have it ready to go as soon as the Karban was brought. The Chachamim didn't protest against that, even though they weren't pleased because of the potential concern that you may end up eating it by mistake. Now the following 3 things, though, they did stop them. Number 1 is that they had trees, that the way of keeping these trees was to cut them down every 7 years, and the trunk would grow new wood, a new tree. Those trees are a sycamore tree and a carob tree. Now they had these trees that their forefathers were makdish, so the trees were hektish, but the new growth they held was not hektish. They held only the base of the tree was hektish, the new growth was not hektish, and therefore they would use it, and the Chachamim stopped them from doing that. The next thing that they did was they allowed people to eat fruits which fell off the date trees on Shabbos. Chachamim stopped them from that, the Gemara will explain. And the third thing was that they took payah, or they left payah, in a field of vegetables. Now the halacha is that fields are supposed to have a corner left for the poor people, but that only applies to certain types of produce. It does not apply to vegetables. And since it doesn't apply to vegetables, that payah is chayev in truma and meiser. By the people of Yericho leaving payah even from something which was not obligated in payah. It was very nice that they left it for the poor people, but what they were leaving for them was usher, because they didn't take off truma and meiser, because they assumed that payah was pater from truma and meiser, which is true, except that these vegetable fields were not really chayiv in payah, and therefore they were chayiv in truma and meiser. Okay, now the Gemara opens with a brisa which lists 6 things that Chizkiyahu HaMelech did, 3 of them which the Chachamim agreed with, and 3 of them which they did not. The 3 things that they agreed with were, number 1, Chizkiyahu's father was a Rasha, so after he died, in order that he should have a kapara, atonement, he did not bury him in a fancy casket engraved as befitting a king. Instead, the Gemara describes it as he dragged the bones on a bed of ropes. That means he had a very minimal shrouds in his burial. Now, the next thing that he did was he ground up the copper snake which Moshe Rabbeinu used to heal the people in the Midbar. It had become an avodah zarah. And the third thing was that he hid the book of cures, which had cures for every disease. Problem was that the purpose of those diseases were that people should turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but if they had the book of cures, they did not do that. So the Chachamim were pleased. They agreed with all these 3 things, but the following 3 they did not agree with. He cut off the doors of the Heichal and sent them as a bribe to the king of Ashur, Syria. They didn't agree with that for obvious reasons. He also redirected the waters of the Gihon spring, which was outside the walls of Yerushalayim. He blocked it up and had it flow to within the walls of Yerushalayim. They didn't agree with that because he should have relied on the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Same problem that happened with Ashur and the doors. And the third thing was that he once made Nisan into Adar Sheni. It was already in the month of Nisan, and he changed it from being Nisan to being the second month of Adar, the second Adar. That's something Chazal learned from Psukim. You're only allowed to do that before Nisan begins. Once it becomes Nisan, you can't change it. The reason he did it was because people were Tameh, and he wanted to give them more chance to become Tahar before Pesach, but the Chachamim did not agree. Okay, now the Gemara goes to the things on the list that the people of Yericho did, and the Gemara explains what they are. So first of all, they would graft tree branches. The Gemara says, what does this grafting mean? So the Gemara has 2 explanations. According to Rav Yehuda, the Amora, according to Rav Yehuda, what they did was they took moist hadas branches and they took beer of a certain type of tree. That's a type of liquid that's made from seeds of a tree called the Daphne tree. They put that together with barley flour, which had been ground less than 40 days before. They put it all together in a kli. They boiled it up, and they injected it into the heart of the trees. This potion would make the tree absorb and suck up a lot of water, so much so that any tree within 4 amos that did not receive the same treatment would immediately dry up and become withered, because all the moisture would be sucked up by the trees that did get the treatment. Now, Rav Acha ben Rava says it's not quite what they did. What they did was they took branches off one tree and they inserted it in the trunk or the large branches of another tree, what we call today grafting. Okay, the next thing that they did was that they wrapped up Shema. What does that mean? So Rabbi Yehuda says what they did was they ran together Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad v'Ahavta. They didn't pause between, they made it into one sentence, straight into v'Ahavta. Rava says they didn't quite do that. What they did was that the phrase Hayoim al levavecha, Shar Aneichim Yisavecha Hayoim al levavecha, they ran together Hayoim al levavecha and made it sound like today it should be on your heart but not tomorrow. That's the wrong implication, and therefore that wasn't a good thing to do. Gemara brings a brisa that explains wrapping up Shema. The Gemara says that it's Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad and without stopping. That's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says not without stopping. They didn't run straight into v'Ahavta, but they didn't say Baruch Shem Kavod Machosei Leilam Va'ed. Now, that is something which we insert between the pasuk of Shema Yisrael and v'Ahavta. They didn't put that in there. Says the Gemara, why do we insert it? The Gemara quotes Shimon ben Lachish, who says that it comes from an incident that happened when Yaakov Avinu was giving over his final brachos to his children in Mitzrayim. He called them together and he said, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to you at the end of time. Says the Gemara, he wanted to explain to them the end of Yamin, the end of Yamin. Rashi translates Yamin as right, the right hand, Yamin. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu's support for the enemies of Klal Yisrael will end, and he will turn it to us, his right hand. But what ended up happening was that the Shekhinah left him, and he no longer knew the time. It was blocked. He was not able to give over that information as to when that would finally happen. So Yaakov thought, oh no, maybe one of my children is a puzzle. Maybe just like Avram had a Yishmael, and my father had an Esav, maybe one of my children is also not befitting. And he said this to them, and they said, to him, they said, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, just like you have nothing in your heart other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we also Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Listen, Yisrael, we also have only Hashem. We don't have anything else. And he responded to them and he said, Baruch, blessed is Shem Kavod Machosei Leilam Va'ed, the glorious name of his kingship forever. So now the Rabbanon had a problem. Yaakov said Baruch Shem. Moshe didn't say Baruch Shem. What should we do? Who should we go like? So what we ended up doing was we decided we're going to say it quietly. We want to not go like one or the other. The compromise is to say it quietly. Says the Gemara, Yitzchak said in the name of the Bei Rabbi Ami, this is just like a princess who smelled a pot of meat cooking. Now it aroused a desire in her to eat it, but it's not befitting for a princess to be eating a pot of meat. So she got stuck, so she told her servants, bring it quietly. Nobody should see, that'll be under the radar. So that's what we do. We say Baruch Shem under the radar. Says the Gemara, in the end we changed and started saying it loudly. The reason is because there were apikorsim who were saying, look what you guys do. You do things quietly when you know that it's wrong. And that is, of course, not correct. We didn't want that to happen. In Nahardava, they didn't have that problem. They went back to saying it quietly. Okay, now the Gemara is going to return to the list of the things that the people of Yericho used to do. And now we're going to analyze the 3 things that the Chachamim protested against, and the Gemara will explain what their machlokes was. Before we do that, the Gemara brings the entire list of 6 things again in a brisa, with 2 slight differences. First of all, when explaining that they allowed people to eat fruits which fell off trees on Shabbos, the Gemara in this brisa spells out more at length that they opened the gates of their orchards to allow poor people who had nothing to eat in a famine year to come in and gather the fruits which fell on the floor on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. That's what they did, and that's what the Chachamim protested against. Now, there's a machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda in this brisa. What exactly, how we phrase the Chachamim's reaction? According to Rabbi Yehuda, the Chachamim protested against 3 things and didn't protest against the other 3 things, even though they weren't happy about it. That's how we had it in our Mishnah. Rabbi Meir has a slightly different version. He says that 3 of them the Chachamim were happy about, and the 3 of the things they weren't happy about. Doesn't say anything about protesting. And Rabbi Yehuda said that can't be it, because if 3 of the things they were happy about, then everybody should be doing those 3 things. It must be that they weren't happy about any of them. 3 they protested, and 3 they didn't protest. Now the Gemara says, hold on a second. You're telling me that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Chachamim were not happy about any of the things on the list. One of the things on the list is harvesting grain before the Korban Omer is brought. But we have a different Mishnah where he says that the Chachamim were happy about that. The Gemara quotes the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that the people of Yericho would harvest and heap the grain before the Korban was brought. The Chachamim were not happy about the heaping, but they were happy about the harvesting. And about the heaping, they protested. So Gemara says, who is it that says that somebody protested? According to Rabbi Meir, there was no protesting. So this Mishnah must be Rabbi Yehuda. And yet it says clearly that about the harvesting of the grain, we didn't have a problem. They were okay with it. So that conflicts with what we're saying in this brisa, that they did have a problem with that. So Gemara says you should have a problem with having harvesting in this Mishnah anyway, because we only listed 3 things that the Chachamim had a problem with, or that the Chachamim protested against. And if you have harvesting and heaping, so then it's 4 things. So you got to take harvesting off the list anyway. It's a mistake to have it in there. It's not the correct girsa. Harvesting should be out of there. Harvesting was never an issue. The Chachamim were totally fine and okay with that. There was no concern that if you harvested your grain before the Korban was brought, then you were going to end up eating it too early. You know that this is grain that you're not allowed to eat yet. When you were heaping it, then there was concern that you were going to end up eating it. Okay, now the Gemara discusses the other things on the list and what the machlokas was. So first of all, we saw that the people of Yericho would use the wood, the branches in the tree that grew from the stumps that they cut down, which were hektish. So Gemara says that they said, listen, only the original trees were hektish, what grows afterwards is not hektish. The Gemara says that the machlokes is like the machlokes between the people of Yericho and the Chachamim was over the halacha of things which grow from hektish. Is there me'ilah on that or not? We have a halacha clearly that says that there is no me'ilah. There's no me'ilah on things which grow afterwards. The Chachamim said it may not be an actual carbon me'ilah, but it's still usher for people to use it. And the people of Yericho said, no, if there's no me'ilah, then there's no isser to use it at all. The next thing were that they allowed the poor people to come take fruits. So Gemara says there's 2 potential concerns with people taking fruits which fell off a tree on Shabbos. Concern number 1 is that they may pick more fruits from the tree. Now that's only a problem concerning fruits which fell off the tree but are still in the tree. The way the date tree grows is the fruits get caught in a cup-shaped branch near the top of the tree. So they would have to go up the tree to pick the fruits. They were supposed to pick only the fruits which were already detached. They already fell off the branches. They were just wedged in the tree up on top. The concern was that they would pick off actual growing fruits. That's one potential concern. The other potential concern is that the fruits are muktzah. They were attached to Shabbos. They were attached to the tree in the beginning of Shabbos, therefore nobody could pick them. Something which is not accessible to you is muktzah for you. And if it's muktzah in the beginning of Shabbos, it says muktzah the whole Shabbos. So which concern was it? And which fruits are we talking about? The concern about picking more fruits only applies to the fruits that are caught up on the top of the tree. The concern of muktzah applies to all fruits. So the Gemara has a machlokes which fruits we're talking about and what their machlokes was. The Gemara quotes Rav Shimon ben Lakish says the whole machlokes was about picking off other fruits, and therefore the only problem was fruits that are high up in the tree, fruits which fell on the ground. There was no machlokes. So the Rabbanan were okay with that, and don't tell me that it's muktzah, because ravens can eat it. Ravens could eat it off the tree, and therefore if somebody had a flock of pet ravens, then he needs those fruits. Even then they're on the tree, it's not considered muktzah, it's considered fitting for his ravens. And if it's fitting for his ravens, then it's not muktzah for him either, and if it falls off the tree, he can eat it even on Shabbos. The Gemara asks, but what do you mean if you have an animal which is living, that's fitting for people, it's called people food, but if it becomes a nevela on Shabbos or Yom Tov, it's now muktzah for the dogs, you can't feed it to your dogs. You don't say that, well, since it was people food in the beginning of Shabbos, so it's befitting, so therefore it's fitting even for the dogs, and if it becomes dog food on Shabbos, the dogs can eat it. You don't say that. You say being people food doesn't make you fitting for dog food, so why would we say being raven food makes these fruits fitting to be people food? The Gemara says, because it's very different. Something which is people food, you do not ever consider it something you would feed to the dogs. Raven food is something which you have your mind on it. You generally have need for it. You have use for it. For you, for the ravens, what's the difference? But if it's people food, you certainly have no tzad that it should be fed to your dogs at all. Now, that was Rav Shimon ben Lakish's understanding. Ravin said differently. Ravin also said the name of Rav Shimon ben Lakish. The first quote was Ula, the name of Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Ravin quoted Rish Lakish as saying the other way. The machlokes is about muktzah, and the question is if it's befitting for your ravens, does that make it befitting for you or not? But as far as climbing the trees to get the fruits which fell off but are still caught in the top of the tree, that everybody would agree is also. The people of Yericho would not allow that either. Okay, next thing on the list was that they gave peya from their vegetables. The Gemara says, why would they do that? We have a specific Mishnah that defines what's chayiv in peya and what is not. The Mishnah says it's only chayiv in peya if the following things apply to it. First of all, it's food. It's food which is being raised by somebody. It's not hefker. It's growing from the ground. It is harvested all at once. You harvest the entire crop in once. You don't harvest each part when it becomes ripe, one part at a time. And it is stored long term. The Gemara says, what if each of these exclude? It's got to be food that excludes types of thorns, which are used. It's the thorns of the karkum plant, the turmeric. If they grow wild, they aren't edible. It's got to be something which is raised that excludes that it's growing hefker, it's unowned. It's got to be from the ground that excludes mushrooms, which are fed from the air, not from the ground. And it's got to be harvested all at once, as opposed to figs, which you harvest the figs as they become ripe, one section at a time. You don't do the whole tree or the whole orchard at once. Anyway, the last thing, which is what we need, is it's got to be something which you can store for a long time. That excludes vegetables. Vegetables have a short shelf life. You can't store them for a lengthy period of time. And therefore, why didn't the people of Yericho know that vegetables are not chayiv in peah? Because they can't be stored for a long time. So the Gemara says that Rav Yehuda explains that we're talking about the leaves which grow out of the turnip plant. Now, turnips you can store for a long time, and if you're able to store the turnips, you can store the leaves as well. You do store the leaves for a long time because you're storing the turnips. And the machlokes was as follows. The leaves of the turnip plant is not a vegetable you can store for a long time. They get stored because you're storing the turnips. Is that called stored for a long time? The Chachamim said no, and therefore it is not chayav in peah. The people of Yericho said yes, you're storing those leaves a long time because they're attached to the turnip root. And therefore it is called something which is stored for a long time. Now on the subject, the Gemara brings a brisa about the halacha of peah as it applies to turnips. It's two brises actually, which the Gemara will then kind of combine into one machlokes. So the two brises are discussing three types of vegetables, and each brisa has a Tanakama and a dissenter. And the dissenter is discussing which of these vegetables are stored for long term. So first of all, the Tanakama says in the first brisa that there is a chiyuv peah on turnips and on cabbages. And in the first brisa, Rabbi Yossi adds also kaplut. In the second brisa, it says that the Tanakama has turnips and kaplut, and Reb Shimon adds kruv. So the three vegetables under discussion here are turnip, cabbage, and kaplut. In all the brises, everybody seems to agree that turnips are something you give peah from. In the first brisa, the Tanakama adds kruv, and Rabbi Yossi adds kaplut. And in the second brisa, the Tanakama adds kaplut, and Rabbi Shimon adds kruv. So Gemara says it would seem to be that there are three disparate opinions here. There's Rabbi Yossi who has all three. There's Rabbi Shimon who has all three. Those are the same. Then there's the Tanakama of Rabbi Yossi that leaves out cabbage, and there's the Tanakama of Rabbi Shimon that leaves out. There's a Tanakama of Rabbi Shimon that leaves out cabbage, and there's a Tanakama of Rabbi Yossi that leaves out kaplut. Three opinions. The Gemara says no, there aren't three opinions. The Tanakama of Rabbi Yossi is Rabbi Shimon, and the Tanakama of Rabbi Shimon is Rabbi Yossi. So the way the brisa works is as follows. The Tanakama in the first brisa says turnip and cabbage. That's Rabbi Shimon. Now Rabbi Yossi adds kaplut, he adds it to turnip, but he doesn't hold of cabbage. And in the second brisa, Rabbi Yossi leads off, and he says, like he says here, turnip and kaplut. He doesn't mention cabbage. And Rabbi Shimon adds cabbage, but he's only adding it to turnip because he doesn't hold of kaplut, like he said in the beginning of the first brisa.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.